We have to create whatever reality we need from scratch.
On every movie, there is an artist who imagines the world of the film, designs it, and then makes it real. The power of the movies is a power beyond words. Like our dreams, movies touch our souls when their images are thrilling, disturbing, or simply true. The artist who creates those visions is the production designer. The film artists who are responsible for every piece of the world you see in a movie are called production designers. Who are they, and what do they do?
We're responsible for making the picture look like it all belongs together, all these thousands of pieces. So that means every location, every set, every vehicle, every device, every prop, every graphic, every sign. I think that it's impossible for a picture to make sense if it doesn't have excellent production design. It just doesn't make sense, you know. I find pictures that are badly designed unwatchable because they don't take place in a real universe, whether it's an imaginary one or not.
When I'm designing a production, I like to think that I'm designing a world, designing a past, designing a future, designing a world for the characters to inhabit, to be changed or left the same as the story dictates. You have to design a life that goes with it. It's not just the desk, but it's what's in every single drawer of the desk. It's the kind of stationery. It is the kind of cookies stuffed in the corners. It is the secret message passed to you. It is the bottle of scotch in the bottom drawer. I think Milos Forman's first concerns were to create the 18th century and Mozart's world in as authentic a way, as real a way as possible.
Milos Forman's film tells of the murderous envy that composer Antonio Salieri feels towards Wolfgang, Amadeus, Mozart.
He felt that Mozart's music represented a new way of music for the 18th century. Salieri was the establishment.
Contrasted with Mozart's music, Salieri's music has a kind of weighty, ponderous quality.
I think Milos Forman wanted to express that visually, and that led us to the choices of colors. Mozart's world is reflective, it is delicate, and a buoyant quality. It's a lifting of the heart when you hear it. If you contrast that with Salieri's world, it is dark, ponderous, velvet, rich, dark colors with a heaviness about them, heavily pigmented. I think by using the music to make the contrasts and translating them visually, I think we had a terrific effect in the overall production of the film.
When you're talking about production design, you're not talking about making things pretty. You're talking about making stories work. Stories work because things look real, because they're convincing, because they don't make you stop and think, because you accept them.
Take The Graduate, a movie shot on location that doesn't look like it was designed.
Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me. Aren't you?
When I first read it, I thought to myself, have we got some cockamamie Romeo and Juliet idea going here?
Designer
What if
Richard
it's the
Silbert is known
Capulets
for his
and the
subtle but decisive style. By understanding the ideas inside The Graduate and supporting them with consistent design choices, he helped create a classic.
Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
And then I realized what the story was really about. It was about keeping up with the Joneses. These weren't different families, they were the same people. They were identical. As a matter of fact, they lived in the same kind of house. But the difference was very important. The girl's house had a round door, which I painted black, in a white building. And the boys had a square door, rectangular. If the staircase was straight in the boys' house, it was curved in the girls' house. It was a female version of the other house. If the floor was white in the boys' house, it was black in the girls' house. And then I put this solarium at the back for the tiger to do her number.
May I ask you a question? What do you think of me?
What do you mean?
You've known me nearly all your life. You must have formed some opinion of me.
Well, I always thought that you were a very nice person.
Silbert's design for The Graduate seems simple, but it is carefully calculated. In a sense, the job is the same if the film is realism or fantasy. The designer's first step is to put their vision on paper so those visual ideas can be shared with the rest of the production team.
My materials of choice are usually on film pastels because they are fast. In film, you have to convey very, very fast, complete ideas. So pastel is great because pastel, very easily you convey light. Because I try to put in all my sketches the light, the way the light hits the sets, correct? And color. No?
Designers like Eugenio Zanetti are the descendants of the whole history of painting, sculpture, and architecture, using traditional tools like pastels and modern ones like computers to express their inspiration. First and foremost, Zanetti is an artist.
My father was a poet. Even when I was a teenager, we want our parents to be as conventional as possible. I didn't like that. But now I understand that his way of looking at reality has inspired a lot of my work.
The movie Restoration shows how Zanetti connects story and image.
The elements in Restoration reflect the central ideas or images. They are in two levels. One level, there is a king, which is at the center of the universe of that period, correct? It's really like the sun of that period. I put it in the first scene in the center of the universe, literally, with the planets circulating around. It's also the story of this journey through the character has through life, and then using then the water as a metaphor and connecting all the moments of this life through water.
The film tells of Dr. Robert Merivale's odyssey through Restoration England, from the royal court to the plague hospitals. A rogue and an adventurer, Merivale's journey is never ordinary, particularly when he meets the woman he is to marry.
Because he's going to meet a woman who's going to change his destiny, these entrants have to be emblematic of what's going on with him. So I came out with all this idea of boats and the wedding in the water and all that.
Production design is telling the story using visual metaphors like water as the journey of life.
Production designer should be the person who conceptualizes completely the whole event that the movie is going to be.
The first designer to really seize control of the artistic vision of a motion picture was William Cameron Menzies. His biggest achievement was David O. Selznick's production of Gone with the Wind. The idea of the film was to capture a world all the way down to the tiniest detail. And Menzies was the man who did it. Historian Rudy Belmer compiled a collection of David O. Selznick's writings, including this famous note on design and Menzies.
Selznick said, I feel that we need a man of Menzies' talent and enormous experience on the sets of this picture, meaning Gone with the Wind, and on its physical production. I hope to have Gone with the Wind prepared almost down to the last camera angle before we start shooting, because on this picture, really thorough preparation will save hundreds of thousands of dollars. So William Cameron Menzies started to do his usual sketching. He would usually, with a script, as he was going through, make his little thumbnail sketches. Then he would enlarge on them. And it was Selznick's idea that he wanted to pre-produce the film by production design.
Cameron Menzies is a man who could visualize entire sequences, not just sets or shots. So first he visualized the sequence. He put it in storyboards that are really moments of film, connect them as a sequence, and then keep those sequences connected in his mind. So he completely designed the movie from a visual point of view.
Gee, I wish they'd hurry.
Wouldn't be in such a hurry to see them go if I were you, my dear. With them goes the last semblance of law and order.
Menzies visualized the entire picture before a single frame was shot.
And then comes where the wounded are outside the station in Atlanta. And the camera follows Vivian Lee, starts in on her, then pulls up and up and up and up, and you see all of the wounded.
The tragedy of the Civil War, the loss of a generation, and the struggle to survive horrendous odds, all in one sweeping image. This scene has become an icon of the Civil War, an image that frames that conflict for modern culture. Victor Fleming, the last of several directors who worked on the film, offered to share his directing credit with Menzies. But Selznick had other ideas, as he explained in this memo.
One of the minor problems in connection with this arrangement is the matter of Menzies' credit. I was thinking of something about production designed by William Cameron Menzies.
The old Hollywood term art director was no longer sufficient to describe the accomplishments of Menzies. David O. Selznick anointed him his production designer, the title we use today. Richard Silbert apprenticed with Menzies in the 1950s.
What I learned from William Cameron Menzies was that his idea was that there was a way of structuring a film so that all the parts belonged to a given whole, and that structure was dramatic. That you could take the elements at your control, in his case it was drawing each shot, but in modern times, you could take all of these things that you were in charge of, color, pattern, architectural space, texture, and use them the way they used these things like notes in music.
As God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again.
Menzies showed that what a production designer does is to capture the basic visual ideas of our culture. So, what are the devices designers use to create iconic images?
The tools that we use as a production designer to tell that story are color, line, and texture. For me, color is my gut emotional response to what's happening in the story.
Color's the key to Naomi Chohan's design for American Beauty.
You could look at American Beauty as just the story of red, because we have Carolyn and her roses, which are so, she grows them just so, and she picks them just so, and they're everywhere. There's Lester's story, or Red Carolyn's story is about control. Lester's story is more about release, the petals. And finally, red is death, it's Lester's blood. So there is a very clear arc.
American Beauty tells of the last year of the life of Lester Burnham, a man whose family seems perfect on the surface. It's a tragedy about a disintegrating family, and it's also a comedy about the materialism of American society.
I will sell this house today.
Carolyn is sort of the embodiment of American Beauty's argument with American culture.
Sell this house today. I will sell this house today.
She's self-made, she's making money. She's all about an idea of life and not so much a lived life. She's very, very tense.
Lester, you're gonna spill beer on the couch.
So what? It's just a couch.
So what it seemed necessary to get across in the design was this constant sense of strain and tension in everything. That the color scheme would always be controlled lends itself to a feeling of tension.
Grays and blues like these represent people controlling emotions. Nothing is spontaneous in this house. In one or two scenes, the colors are reversed, and Carolyn cuts loose. Notice who's red and who's gray here.
I am sick and tired of being treated like I don't exist. You two do whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do it, and I don't complain. Now, all I want is
you
the
don't
same...
complain? Oh, please, excuse me. I must be psychotic then. If you don't complain, what is this? Yeah, let's bring in the laugh meter and see how loud it gets on that one. You don't complain.
Line is another crucial element.
Line is the shape of the room, the size of the room. Is the ceiling low? Is it high? Is the scale of the room very grand? Is it a long corridor, and does that long corridor respond to something that's happening psychologically at that particular moment in the screenplay?
Master director Alfred Hitchcock started as an art director. He used line on screen to maximum effect.
Have you planned your vacation yet? You've a choice between sand and sunburn, or mountain climbing and the Charlie horse.
Bob Boyle was the designer who helped him put his vision on the screen.
Hitchcock wanted somebody who could do continuity drawings, or as we call them, storyboards. In Hitchcock's case, he having been an art director himself, and who had done most of the jobs needed, so he was well aware of all the tools of the trade. But what he was really interested in was trying to show human feelings, you know, all of his fears, which he was able to put up on the screen.
In North by Northwest, when the thing that I have never been able to forget, when Cary Grant is abandoned in the Great Prairie. The road is here, and then there's the crossroad, and it makes segments of the screen in such a powerful manner. It's like dividing up a canvas.
The infinite flatness in this scene tells us how vulnerable Cary Grant is.
Hot day.
Seen worse.
Are you supposed to be meeting someone here?
Waiting for the bus. Due any minute.
I became indoctrinated with the need to put feelings in the physical form. Success of somebody like a Hitchcock is what he doesn't show you. It's the dark at the head of the stair. It's what's around the corner. What will explode, not the explosion.
The use of line is a powerful way to create tension on screen. Texture is another.
And texture, of course, provides sort of the emotional surface that's behind the character. Because when you're designing a film, not only are you designing for the wide shot, but you're also designing for that close-up. So what is behind the actor's head can very often tell a whole story.
Texture means the quality of a surface, rough or smooth, soft or hard. Citizen Kane is a catalog of textures, showing the emotional underpinnings of a man's entire life, as well as the character of the different times and places he lived. Designer Perry Ferguson was faced with a large budget cut midway through the project. This was after he had already begun to design over 120 sets for Kane. He used every trick in the book, shooting on other people's sets, borrowing set pieces, hanging black drapes to disguise the fact that there was nothing there. Ferguson's virtuosity with texture gave Kane a truth and a punch that it retains today.
In Citizen Kane, they did something rather interesting. In piecing all the sets together, they had a lot of light and shadow. It was almost like these dark shadows in there. Your eye filled in the blanks, as him coming down the stairs, or Dorothy Commingore trying to put a puzzle together all over the floor. That told a story. You had bits and pieces. You had this grand staircase that they came down. What was on the other side of the grand staircase?
The film spans decades and continents, and every step of the way Ferguson frames the actors with just the right texture to conjure luxury, emptiness, mystery, or grandeur. The production designer's tools, color, line, and texture, are the same ones painters have used since painting began. Working conditions are different, though. Designing a movie is a little like painting a landscape in a hurricane. Mid-sized studio productions like Kane called for constant improvisation. But there was one director who planned his films like he was building the pyramids.
Right, now, you people, you townspeople over beyond the gate there. Yes, now as these crusaders come riding through, you're seeing a great movement, a great sweeping forward of these men who are leading you, perhaps for all time.
Cecil B. DeMille, the man who practically invented the image of the Hollywood director, was perhaps the best friend the artists behind film ever had. It was his respect for the artists that really made his spectacles soar.
We would sit up in the art department doing all the storyboard and look out the window, and there he would be strolling in with some nuns and rabbis, and I felt he was God, and, you know, bringing his friends for supper.
Well, we always pitched in on DeMille Pictures because there was so much to do, tremendous research. On a DeMille picture, you did the furniture, the wardrobe, everything.
Oh, tremendous amount of research. With DeMille, you know, half the research library at Paramount was from his pictures.
A large-scale action scene like this one was designed months in advance, down to the last detail. And it was designed. DeMille fed the public's love of spectacle, and he was one of the few directors who had the power, the determination, and the resources to realize movies on a grand scale.
I think that DeMille understood, because he was very, very smart, that he had to use the best possible talent that was available, and he attracted great illustrators and some great painters, and he put them at work and used them very well. And he also knew how to use their talent. And in the case of Grosbeck, for instance, which is beyond a talented illustrator, is a great painter.
The artwork of his designers did serve DeMille's movies, but often they are fully realized works in and of themselves. Many, like the works of Dan Sayer Grosbeck, have been exhibited in galleries and museums. For the Ten Commandments, DeMille commissioned oils from artist Arnold Freeberg, paintings that were critical to the construction of sets and costumes, as well as the lighting of the scenes. His attention to artists was complete. Every one of these items from the vast DeMille vaults bears a simple notation by the master director himself. OK, CB. DeMille was one of the founders of the studio system, the factory town that Hollywood became during its mid-century heyday, where Gene Allen designed some of cinema's most elegant films.
The advantage of the old major studio system, where they had these departments and great personnel, it was a city within a city. But within that art department, there were the art directors, and there were the assistant art directors, and there were the draftsmen, and there was the sketch room.
Each art director was encouraged to create his own library within his office because basically they were employed on a full-time basis. They had an estimating department. There was the model shop was fantastic. Of course, as a young guy, working in the model shop was always a lot of fun. All the sets went into model process before they were built. And so you had an opportunity to really feel the three-dimensionality of the set. So that wonderful store of tools, we have to work a little harder today to find those support systems.
My Fair Lady was one of the last of the great studio pictures. One key to this masterpiece was the long-term partnership of director George Cukor and designer Gene Allen, and the support they found within the studio walls.
In the very beginning, I didn't know that I could stand right there by the camera with Cukor, so I'd be off somewhere, and Cukor would had eyes in the back of his head. If I got more than 20 feet away, he'd yell out, "Where's Gene?" So he taught me to be aware of everything that goes on the set. And I was usually, for all the pictures, all those years, not more than 3 feet off of his right hip pocket.
The old studios were little kingdoms that made possible collaborations between artists like George Cukor and Gene Allen on films like Les Girls, A Star is Born, and My Fair Lady. Scenes like this represented the height of studio collaboration. Within the studio walls, anything could be built. Anything except the real world itself. Time and tastes changed. And in the 1960s, filmmakers ventured into that real world in search of grit and authenticity. One of the leaders among designers was Richard Silbert, who was already famous for his meticulous work.
The word that I use for it is clean, and if I can be more specific, he doesn't use anything extraneous. I feel like every detail in his sets, in his compositions, is very precise, very on point as far as the story goes.
And the truth is, anybody can do one movie as a production designer, director, DP, or actor and be a genius. You got to do a couple of movies. You have to do a bunch of movies, and you have to consistently be good, or almost consistently be good, I think, in order to really say someone is that good. Dick is basically bulletproof.
This story is about a drought. And what does a drought mean? How do you visualize a drought?
I'll get to it this afternoon if I can. Dick, what are you doing here?
Nothing, Morty. It's my lunch hour. Thought I'd drop by and see who dropped dead lately.
Yeah? Isn't this something? Middle of a drought and the water commissioner drowns. Only in L.A.
In Roman Polanski's Chinatown, private detective Jake Gittes becomes entangled in a vast conspiracy to hide a monumental land grab in 1930s L.A. A series of murders are committed to cover it up and to hide the hideous secret of one of Los Angeles' most prominent citizens.
There is such a thing as structure, visual structure. It has nothing to do with the cameraman, it has nothing to do with the director, and it has nothing to do with the actors. It has to do with this particular script.
Chinatown has the moral and emotional force that it does because of that composition that Silbert devised, a set of simple ideas that all convey the inevitability of the tragedy of Chinatown.
All the colors in the picture should look like, in the interiors especially, burnt grass, dead leaves, umbers. All the buildings in the picture should be white. They should be generic, which means Spanish. And the whiteness is heat. You put sunlight on a white building and you get heat. And heat is part of the story.
Something to drink. What do you
The best scene I can give you as an example is when Evelyn Mulray and Jake meet at the back of the house. And Roman did something most people wouldn't dare to do. He stuck her in the sunlight. So she was roasted. I mean, the wall behind her was hot.
Anyway, the point is I'm not in business to be loved, but I am in business. And believe me, Mrs. Mulray, whoever set your husband up set me up.
And then all the buildings should be above the eye line of this person who's looking, because it's much harder to go uphill than down.
I think Chinatown is just the very best location film that was ever created. And it is a recreation of the 30s. But the locations, every selection of every location. And the other thing is that it comes together with the plot and the characterization in an almost perfect way.
I mean, the idea that all the glass doors feel like water and frozen water, and you can't quite, they're obscure. And obscure is a problem in this kind of a movie. Obscure means you can't quite see the truth. And here is a guy in the genre, which is very important, seeking the truth. Somebody's going to pay if he ever finds out the truth.
Hello, Claude. Where'd you get the midget?
And often, in this case, it's him.
You're a very nosy fellow, kitty cat, huh? You know what happens to nosy fellows? Huh? No? Wanna guess?
Shot largely on location, Silbert managed to find buildings around Los Angeles that fit his special recipe for the movie. Echo Park was one of the locations that remained largely unchanged.
You'll love it.
The interesting part of this is that here we are 30 years later, and it hasn't changed. And it's probably 30 years before I saw it, in 1973, it hadn't been changed. It's one of those things about this area, which in a sense is a backwater. There's not enough money to do anything cute.
A couple of streets over is the home of Ida Sessions, a minor player in the scandal who meets an ugly end.
Ida Sessions is a perfect example, but it has in it something that's also in this picture at another point, which is the idea of symmetry. If you look at that house, it's completely balanced. It's really fun to disarm the audience. You see? He's gotten here, and it's all fine. But there in the middle of it is this long, narrow space, which produces immediately, if you do it right, this sense of anxiety. And when he gets to the door and there's the broken glass, and Roman is behind him, which he's done for the entire picture, he finally comes around and it becomes his point of view. Where you see all these things leading up to a dead body.
If I were to pick my most perfect American film, I think it would be Chinatown. The art direction is superb in every way, just the evocation of time. The plot is superb, the acting is superb.
Go home, Jake. I'm doing you a favor. Come on, Jake.
Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown.
By the mid-70s, the old studio system had completely passed away. The training and the experience of the close-knit colony of artists was gone. Gone too were the legions of in-house craftsmen, experts and specialists in everything from greenery and weaponry to wainscoting and carpeting that the studios deployed to build worlds without number. Today's production designer has even more responsibilities and complexities to deal with. Where once he or she was an architect, an artist, an historian, and an engineer, now the job description includes computer expert, effects designer, anthropologist, and so on. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner shows the complexity of the art form. In Blade Runner, Harrison Ford's Rick Deckard is part cop, part executioner. He's on a mission to find and retire a band of replicants, murderous artificial humans.
Where I live. Nice place. Yeah, sure, I guess.
There was an escape from the off-world colonies 2 weeks ago. 6 replicants, 3 male, 3 female. They slaughtered 23 people and jumped a shuttle. An aerial patrol spotted the ship off the coast. No crew, no sight of them.
Far from being the usual sci-fi shoot-'em-up, Blade Runner turns into a dark and moody meditation on identity and human mortality.
Conceptually, Blade Runner came about through hundreds of hours of discussion with Ridley Scott, doing these little vignette sketches. Out of this multi-layered visual concept of this deteriorated inner city all came about.
Widely regarded as one of the best and most influential production designs in the history of cinema, Blade Runner was a film that benefited from an astonishing team of artists, headed by Ridley Scott as director, and a labor dispute that let the design team go wild.
We prepared the movie for 9 months, which is very, very unusual today, for a film to have that much preparation time. And it was through a sheer accident because partway through the preparation period, the actors went on strike. So we just kept prepping it and kept designing and redesigning and improving and during that actors strike, the only group of people that were on the film was my art department. And it was because of the amount of time that we had to prepare and to analyze and to conceptualize the film that we were able to arrive at what you see on the screen.
The densely layered film is a catalog of in-jokes and homage, keying into art and architecture from around the world. The fascist architecture of Albert Speer at the Tyrell Corporation, the organic work of Spaniard Antonio Gaudi and Deckard's womb-like apartment, neon pop signage from modern Tokyo, as well as local inspirations like Frank Lloyd Wright's Innes Brown House and the Bradbury Building. Star Rutger Hauer once observed that what Blade Runner taught him was that the future was old.
You take a look at the architecture that we did, the so-called detailing of this brutalistic reinterpretation of eclectic architecture, and you combine that with the compression of the city and what we did on the walls of buildings. We were taking elements out of packing cartons, put all those funny forms, and we were putting them up on buildings and painting them out just to give them texture and form, bringing in transformers, because the whole concept of the city is the city was deteriorating. The buildings didn't function anymore. We called it retrofitting. So we retrofitted to everything. There were pipes, there were wires, there were cables hanging off of everything. Nothing worked properly. With every design decision that came up, from the streetlights to the parking meters, to the television set in Deckard's apartment, to the glass that he drank that scotch out of. No one had ever seen that glass before. That glass, by coincidence, after we had shown Ridley 200 glasses, had just been brought into this country, and we bought them all.
So when we were scouting Blade Runner, and we were downtown looking at the Bradbury Building and wandering around and everything, he said, "Oh, can I see the roof?" And we said, "Okay," and we went up onto the roof. And as you know in the film, there ends up to be quite a long scene that takes place up on top of the roof. Anyway, so he's looking around and he says, oh, I want to look down over there. And so he's leaning over the side of the building and someone's holding his feet. And he says, Peg, come here, I want you to look at this. So I had to lean over the Bradbury building while someone's holding my feet. And he's pointing out all these details. Look at that. Isn't that marvelous? We're going to shoot this way. We're going to do that. And all I'm thinking about is how I'm going to crash and die on this Scout.
Ridley Scott is perhaps the most prominent modern director in the mold of Alfred Hitchcock, a director who creates and thinks like a production designer.
I think, for instance, Ridley Scott storyboards his pictures. He does it himself. I have friends who work with him. I've seen a lot of this stuff. He figures out what each shot goes. I mean, that's what William Cameron Menzies did on Gone with the Wind.
Blade Runner had a tremendous influence over all of us about our ideas about what the future would bring us. I think it is the confluence of ideas and design that make Blade Runner so very interesting to us and remains interesting to this day.
I always sensed the truth in the look of the film. The opening night of Blade Runner, we wound up going to the midnight showing. We were going to get out around 2 in the morning. And the streets of Westwood are deserted. And all of a sudden, we hear this whirring sound. And about a block down, I see a lone figure in the streets with a motorized pack on his back with a blower in his hand, blowing the trash toward us. And I just turned to David, my art director, I said, nothing's changed, it's here.
From the heart of Bed-Stuy, you're listening to We Love Radio.
Doing the yin and the yang, the hip and the hop, the stupid fresh thing, the flippity flop. I have today's forecast for you. Hot!
Chinatown and Blade Runner were both big-budget films. But what about low-budget, independent films? Design is no less critical to one of these so-called small films. If anything, a designer like Wynne Thomas has to be much smarter about creating the world that will tell the story. Case in point, Spike Lee's breakthrough film, Do the Right Thing.
Do the Right Thing is the story of a black community and their relationship with Sal, who runs the local pizza store. And the film takes place over the course of the hottest day of the summer. And there's a series of characters that we meet, all of them who interact with each other and who all interact with Sal. And over the course of the day, there's a misunderstanding that occurs, and it sparks a series of conflicts.
Rarely do I see any American Italians eating in here. All I see is black folks. So since we spend much money here, we do have some say.
You looking for trouble?
Are you a troublemaker? Is that what you are?
You making trouble?
Yeah, I'm a troublemaker. I'm making trouble.
You're a real ball breaker. Always coming in here looking for trouble, huh? Suppose I busted your head. How would you...
Now, this is an example of production design, art direction, being not about period pictures or building big sets. You know, it's much harder to do something like this, to find the right note in a realistic situation and then make a bold stroke, you know. That's the summit of the art, you know, to put all that together.
Thomas took a regular city block in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood and turned each building on it into a home for one of Spike Lee's characters.
Where I'm sitting right now is the stoop of the character that John Savage plays, which was the yuppie character who was moving into the neighborhood. And there's a little scene of conflict between him and some of the neighborhood boys.
Then why don't you move back to Massachusetts?
I was born in Brooklyn.
To my left was we used the interior, the lower interior, for the mayor's home. This is where the mayor lived. And from where I'm sitting now, I can see where Mother's sister lived, which is the character that Ruby Dee played.
There have been a lot of pictures made in this kind of neighborhood in New York City. And this one looked different than any of them. And they made that place look like something entirely original. It was very theatrical, but it was very realistic.
You know, Spike pours his heart and soul into his scripts. The great thing about him is that he lets the people who are working for him interpret that material.
What? Always do the right thing.
That's it?
That's it.
I got it. I'm gone.
He gave me a great deal of freedom in finding this location. And we utilized every single one of those empty apartments and houses. Everything was shot on this block for Do the Right Thing.
The joy of working in the movie business is the collaborative process. And we start this process with the director and the writer. And then we work with the cinematographer and the costume designer, and particularly in my case, with the set decorator. And the joy of working in this business is talking and communicating with all those people to give definition to what it is that we're trying to do. Now, what production designers do is to provide the visual boundaries everyone is working within.
His success with Spike Lee's Jungle Fever and Malcolm X brought Thomas a number of new assignments, from the wild science fiction romp of Tim Burton's Mars Attacks to A Beautiful Mind.
I think as a designer, the thing that's important to me is how an environment feels, because that is what the audience is going to take away with it when it's watching the movie, either on a subconscious or conscious level.
A Beautiful Mind deals with the paranoia and confusion of John Nash, and Thomas's design is key to helping the audience understand his madness.
I loved all the curved walls. When you're looking down a straight corridor, you can see who's approaching you. When you're looking down a curved corridor, you don't quite know what's around the corner. And that's what's happening. The Nash character is not quite sure what's going to come at him from around the corner.
We are functioning as architects, we are functioning as interior designers, we are historians, we are diplomats. And I think ultimately we are observers of human behaviors and all the sort of fragilities of the human heart, which of course helps us define characters.
You look terrible. I want you to eat. I want you to rest well, and a month from now, this Hollywood big shot's gonna give you what you want.
Too late. They start shooting in a week.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
Francis Ford Coppola's magnificent Godfather films feature great writing, beautiful cinematography, and a legendary cast. They also feature one of film's best designs by Dean Tavoularis.
Dean is a magnificent production designer. I mean, he controls color as well or better than anyone has ever done.
And he seems to create a vision for the film. He gives those films a kind of sepia tint that puts us in a sense of history. And then he is a great master of detail, which is in fact realistic, but always manipulated by his sense of the story.
What is your name? Come on, son. What is your name?
Tuo nome? Vito Andolini from Corleone.
Corleone. Vito Corleone.
I've always considered Dean Tavoularis as the apotheosis of really, really gifted artists in cinema. There's no question of it. The scene where the Godfather lies in the hospital, and as the doorway of the hospital, the greens and the greeny blacks and the blacks, and everything he touches is so unique and so definitive.
What an art director does or production designer does, I think it enters a little bit into a mystical kind of thing. Sure, you build the set, you pick the locations, you repaint the locations. One of the things you do in the beginning of a film is also pick your crew. You teach them quickly that it's not that way, it's going to be this way. And there's a certain mystique that I think, gets into it. I mean, they can almost look at you and say, well, it has to be, he won't like that.
You know my father? Men are coming here to kill him. You understand? Now help me, please.
Tavoleros' design is successful because it contains exact details inside a sweeping operatic style. But most importantly, he understands actors and provides a stage for one of the most extraordinary casts ever assembled.
Sonny, come on, don't touch the...
In Lake Tahoe, I was working there, and Francis said to me, well, this guy's going to come out, he's going to play Marlon Brando character as a young man. His name is Bobby De Niro and so forth. So he was this actor. I didn't know him. So we would go out to these little taverns and play pinball machines and stuff and talk. I always like to talk to the actors and what, they're building this character. Most actors are quite open about that, and their production designer is quick to come up with ideas that would help the actor. Say, you can do this, what about this? And they get very excited about that.
The Godfather is a film that has a whole vision behind it. Tavoleros' design is so decisive because of the long discussions he's had with the stars and his other collaborators, cinematographer Gordon Willis and director Francis Ford Coppola. A deep understanding of everything about the film allows him to immerse the audience in an entirely believable and startlingly complete world.
Well, the genius of that film was to take all of those images and, iconize them. They became for all time. They became eternal. And, they had to be to live up to what was going on everywhere else in the film, some of the great performances and direction and cinematography of all time. So talk about an icon, that's an imaginary world that has just drilled itself into our national consciousness. That's what we think the mafia looks like.
Buonasera. Buonasera. What have I ever done to make you treat me so disrespectfully?
Production designers are responsible for developing and also keeping faith with the iconography of our culture. For instance, Mad Scientist Lab. Everybody knows what that looks like. Well, there was a first one, and a production designer created it, and because it worked, it became the standard against which all Mad Scientist Labs were judged. The Civil War looks like Gone with the Wind. Everybody, the image of the Civil War is that amazing shot of the wounded at the Atlanta railway station. Artistic activity is totally ruthless. Everything is sacrificed to getting the shot or making the picture or making the point.
There is no profession like it. Production designers are historians, painters, engineers, diplomats, and dramatists. They envision and create entire worlds. Their images are icons of our modern culture. They are the architects of our dreams, the masters of production.